I'm the director of the Adler Marshfield Public Library, and I want to welcome you to the Spoken History series. It's really lovely to see such a nice group of people. I don't know whether it's scintillating presenter or a great topic. Maybe it's both. This is good. And we want to welcome Jim Adler tonight. He's going to be speaking about the history of the Adler Bakery Company. And if you don't know where it was in the spot of the Thimberberry bookstore. And second floor? Or was it both at one time?
Oh, it was the whole building.
Okay, I'm going to learn something tonight too. Anyway, thank you. Give a good warm welcome to Jim.
Oh, I want to thank, first of all, the Spoken History group for inviting me to do this tonight. It sounded like it would be a lot of fun, so I couldn't pass that opportunity up. And then also want to thank so many of you for coming tonight when you could be playing in the mud. A beautiful evening like this, I'm totally surprised. As I mentioned off and on tonight, I was hoping for a baker's dozen here, and we've definitely exceeded that. I guess I'll be taking about 45 minutes tonight. That's totally up to you if you have questions and so forth. But I'm going to start out by running this video, which lasts just a hair over 15 minutes. And then I'm going to restart the video and pause it frequently and embellish some of the stuff with the Heim stories on it. There's a number of Heim stories here. We have a number of family here tonight. My brother Pat is here. He's the greatest brother. He helps me doing things on the computer. And he's a couple years younger than I am. Now remember that face, because towards the beginning of the video you will see a picture of our grandfather. And by golly, spit image. Yeah, it's unreal. It's unreal. So anyway, then when I restart the video, then I will pause it frequently, add in some stuff, and that's a great time to just wave your hand and ask questions and so forth. And I'll try to keep us on pace so we finish up in about 45 minutes and you can get home and water your lawns. Okay? Let's make sure this works.
The Adler Baking Company served the Marshfield, Wisconsin area from April 4th, 1921 until April 30th, 1966. Adler Bakery was founded by John E. Adler. Originally named the Vienna Bakery, he purchased the then 10-year-old business from Albert Pleth. John E. Adler was born on June 6, 1867 in Washington County, near Germantown, approximately 30 miles northwest of Milwaukee. He was the fourth child of Henry Adler and Elizabeth Kriech Adler. Henry Adler was born in Prussia in 1823 and migrated to the United States in the early 1850s. He was a farmer. His older brother, Christoph, also settled in the Marshfield area. What is now known as Adler Road led to the farm Christoph cleared on the west side of the city. Descendants of Christoph went on to establish theater and other businesses in Marshfield. The parents of Henry and Christoph were Johannes Adler and Agnetus Maria Caspar Adler of Dorbach, Prussia. Before operating the bakery in Marshfield, John Adler worked at a wide variety of jobs. He moved to Marshfield in about 1880 and was working at a stave factory when its boilers exploded, killing 2 men. About 1883, he was a member of Marshfield's first police force. At the time of the Great Fire of 1887, he was employed as a stonemason. He helped rebuild the city, including reconstruction of the Upham plant. Next, he became a baker, learning in Marshfield for 3 years before working as a baker in Milwaukee, Chicago, and Madison. He also worked at a Chicago hotel for 2 years. After returning to Marshfield in the late 1890s, John owned and operated several saloons at different locations and times. When Prohibition started in 1920, he was forced to close a saloon. At that time, he purchased the Plath Bakery at 166 South Central Avenue, immediately north of the Hotel Charles. Guests at the hotel were famously treated to the wonderful aroma of baking bread. Initially, sales were primarily over the counter at the Vienna Bakery and to rural stores served by the railroad. Large wooden crates were used to ship the loaves of bread. Truck routes were added in the mid-1920s. Local grocery stores were also stocked with bread and other bakery products. John Adler married Lena Upman on February 15, 1904 at St. John's Catholic Church in Marshfield. They had 6 children: Mabel Adler Rosinski, Barbara Adler Paulin, Raymond Adler, Sylvester Adler, Margaret Adler Martin, and Donald Adler. The sons were involved in the business part-time before their graduation from high school. Raymond became full-time in 1927, sometimes as a route salesman. His father semi-retired in 1930 because of health problems, and Ray assumed the management of the bakery at that time. Sylvester, known by many as Shorty, followed as a full-time employee in 1929. Clarence Paulin, the husband of their sister Barbara, was hired in 1926. And Donald Adler joined his brothers full-time after discharge from the Army in 1945. In 1932, the name of the business was changed from the Vienna Bakery to the Adler Baking Company. At that same time, a second building was purchased at 343 South Central Avenue and was called the Adler Pastry Shop. Clarence Paulin became the manager of the pastry shop. Bread was baked and donuts were fried at the main location. The pastry shop prepared the sweet rolls, pies, cakes, coffee cakes, and cookies. Legend has it that John Adler often handed out fresh sugar cookies to youngsters who happened to be passing by the front of the Vienna Bakery. John Adler died on March 30th, 1943. This photo of Donald, Lena, and John was captured just months earlier. His son Donald was serving in the Army at Camp Wallace, Texas, at the time of his death, and was called home for the funeral. Donald was later stationed in the South Pacific. A partnership was then formed between Lena Adler and her 3 sons after John died. Ray was responsible for the general management of the company, including retail sales, ordering of supplies, and personnel oversight. Shorty Adler was in charge of operations, the baking, slicing, and wrapping. Before entering the Army, Donnie Adler had graduated from Wausau Business College. After his discharge in 1945, he assumed the bookkeeping duties. Raymond Adler married Valerie Harry in 1939. They had 4 sons, Robert, Patrick, James, and Richard. Sylvester Adler married Lucille Spindler in 1941. They had 7 children, Paul, Russell, Mary, Barbara, Janice, John, and David. Donald Adler married Louise Nowicki in 1948. They had 3 sons, Gordon, Gary, and Greg. Barbara Adler married Clarence Paulin in 1926. They had a son, Laverne, and a daughter, Beverly. Ray Adler is on the left of this snapshot. Wilmer and Dorothy Paulin both worked at Adler Bakery. Wilmer for much of his adult life. He was a brother of Clarence Paulin. They were also dear friends of the entire Adler family. They are shown here with their son Jack.
Come in. Well, 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 look who's here. I haven't seen you in many a year. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake, baked a cake, baked a cake. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake. How'd you do, how'd you do, how'd you do? Had you dropped me a letter, I'd have hired a band, grandest band in the land. Had you dropped me a letter, I'd have hired a band and spread the welcome mat for you. Oh, I don't know where you came from, 'cause I don't know where you've been, but it really doesn't matter. Grab a chair and fill your platter and dig, dig, dig right in. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake, hired a band. Goodness sake, if I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake. How'd you do, how'd you do, how'd you do? How'd you do? Had you dropped me a letter, I'd have hired a band, grandest band in the land. Had you dropped me a letter, I'd have hired a band, spread the welcome mat for you. Oh, I don't know where you came from, 'cause I don't know where you've been, but it really doesn't matter. Grab a chair and fill your platter and dig, dig, dig right in. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake, hired a band. Goodness sake, if I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake. How'd you do, how'd you do, how'd you do? How'd you do, how'd you do, how'd you do? How'd you do?
Hoop-dee-doo, hoop-dee-doo. I hear a polka and my troubles are through. Hoop Hoop-de-doo, hoop-de-doo. This kind of music is like heaven to me. Hoop-de-doo, hoop-de-doo. It's got me higher than a kite. Hand me down my soup and fish, I am gonna get my wish. Hoop-de-doo in it tonight. When there's a trombone playing, I get a thrill, I always will. When there's a concertina stretched about a mile, I always smile, 'cause that's my style. When there's a fiddle in the middle, oh, it really is a riddle how he plays a tune so sweet. Plays a tune so sweet that I could die. Lead me to the floor.
Lena Adler died on February 3, 1966. The buildings at 166 South Central Avenue and at 343 South Central Avenue were part of Mrs. Adler's estate. This fact added financial stress to the business. After 45 years, the Adler Baking Company discontinued operations on Saturday, April 30th, 1966. At that time, there were 20 full-time and 4 part-time employees. The former Vienna Bakery building was sold and became the new home of Gerald's Clothing. Today, it is the location of Thimbleberry's Books. The Adler Pastry Shop became the John H. Keel Photography Studio for many years. Another photography business is now in that location.
A lot of fun putting that together, and my brother Pat did the narration. And Pat was, for a good part of his career, worked in radio, and did play-by-play and news and all of the whole gamut, and also did some sports broadcasting, so he was the obvious choice. Okay, let's see, how do I get this to stop at least? And this particular sign here, I got to thank Darla Hager for it, because she found it somewhere, I believe. I'm sure that was you.
I don't remember, but I'll take the credit though.
Let me photograph it, quite a few years ago. So this is where I'm going to stop and start a lot. Pass this over. My parents, Raymond and Valerie, had a lot of photos, which I copied, scanned, and so forth. And they also had a lot of movie footage, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. There you go. We're not sure
The
what
Adler Baking Company.
double flavor means, but.
That was my first question.
Well, yeah, please feel free to ask questions. Yeah,
Flavor.
double flavor, I guess there's flavor and then there's double flavor. Maybe nowadays you'd have to prove something. But it wasn't scientific, I don't think. It was enriched, we know that.
Served the Marshfield, Wisconsin area from April 4th, 1921 until April 30th, 1966. Adler Bakery was founded.
That's the spitting image of my brother. Glasses are similar.
By John E. Adler. Originally named the Vienna Bakery, he purchased the then 10-year-old business from Albert Plath. John E. Adler was born on June 6, 1867 in Washington County, near Germantown, approximately 30 miles northwest of Milwaukee. He was the fourth child of Henry Adler and Elizabeth Creech Adler.
Now, there's a lot of German towns. There's a German town that was near New Lisbon or Boston also. And my wife Dorothy's father grew up there in that German town. And that is now Castle Rock Lake, where he grew up. He bought that land somehow, probably for a penny on the dollar, and flooded it. But it's now a nice lake. So Germantown is all over in Wisconsin. And my grandfather was born in 1867. Now bear that in mind in a little bit.
Adler was born in Prussia in 1823 and migrated to the United States in the early 1850s. He was a farmer. His older brother, Christoph, also settled in the Marshfield area. What is now known as Adler Road led to the farm Christoph cleared on the west side of the city. Descendants of Christoph.
This Nuremberg, Germany, is probably 40 miles southwest of Frankfurt. And I have written to them. I only tried once. I wrote to the Honorable Mayor. It's a town of, it's a municipality of about 700 people. Probably has always been a municipality of about 700 people, no more, no less. I didn't hear back from them. My question was, after apologizing for writing it in English, my question was, do you have any funny-looking people living there yet? Maybe my relatives, you know. And I don't know, maybe they posted my letter on a bulletin board somewhere, maybe not, but that was 4 months ago maybe already, so I'm not hopeful of getting anything unless I keep trying. But I'd kind of like to go there sometime, I guess. Time is running out, but it would be an interesting place to go to. Anyway, I always heard that our ancestors came from Prussia, and I always thought Prussia was on the eastern side of Germany towards Poland. And I guess my geography wasn't very good. I slept through that day in class, and I understand now that can be southwestern Germany too, Frankfurt area. The name Adler, like Johannes Adler, that would be Adler. Adler means eagle in German. And then my great times three, grandmother, her last name was Casper. And Casper in German means Casper. Okay, so somewhere in the 1850s, and I haven't found any stowaway records or anything like that for ships coming in, whatever, for Christoph or Christopher and Henry. They were brothers, and they are the two brothers who basically have the history in Marshfield. So Christoph is a descendant, or is the father of J.P. Adler, who had the theater business in town. And he was quite a famous theater owner back in the day. I mean, people in Hollywood knew him. He was prominent. And Betty Adler was his daughter. Betty and Ann, he had daughters. And Betty managed or owned the theater, and then she eventually sold it to Paul Rogers, and you probably are aware of that. And but Christopher started a farm that, my understanding is between West 8th Street in Marshfield and Adler Road. So that area was the Adler farm, and the Adler Road name came from that. So I only recently heard that it was that area, and our friend Dick Martin lived on Martin Drive. They built a house in that area, and you know where I mean, Bill, right? And that would have been the Adler farm back then, to my understanding. So Henry Adler, he was involved in farming also, and I can't tell you a whole lot more about what he did other than that.
Went on to establish theater and other businesses in Marshfield. The parents of Henry and Christoph were Johannes Adler and Agnetus Maria Caspar Adler of Dorbach, Prussia. Before operating the bakery in Marshfield, John Adler worked at a wide variety of jobs.
Now, I'm just a constant interrupter. I pointed out before that John Adler was born in 1867. So in 1880, he worked at a stave factory. He was a slave in a stave factory. And so he was 13 years old maybe when he got his job there, you know. So that's a family tradition, okay? That's how I'll explain it too as well. And then, as a member of the Marshfield's first police force, he was pretty young then too, so he was maybe 16 then. I hope he was able to get a permit for a firearm. And then, then he was a stonemason when he was 20 years old. But he tried a lot of different things, I guess.
He moved to Marshfield in about 1880 and was working at a stave factory when his boilers exploded, killing 2 men. About 1883, he was a member of Marshfield's first police force. At the time of the Great Fire of 1887, he was employed as a stonemason. He helped rebuild the city, including reconstruction of the Upham plant. Next, he became a baker, learning in Marshfield for 3 years before working as a baker in Milwaukee, Chicago, and Madison. He also worked at a Chicago hotel for 2 years. After returning to Marshfield in the late 1890s, John owned and operated several saloons at different locations and times. When Prohibition...
No, that was the club saloon there. And the club saloon, as I understand it, is where Mittens is. It was where Mittens Appliance is now. That was the club, which would be right across from where the bakery was. So it's a small town. Notice there's spittoons, and you know, all the nice things about a tavern. And I happen to have here a token. It's good for 5-cent drink. It says John E. Adler Prop. So that's kind of cool. It's probably worth more than 5 cents. I'd pass it around, but it's worth more than 5 cents. Anyway, I think that's kind of cool. Little something else about John E. Adler. For any young folks, and we got some young folks in the audience, it's notable that a lot of this history stuff doesn't mean anything until you sometimes get into your 40s, 50s, even 60s. And you miss out a lot of chances to pick the brains of your elders. You know? I wish I had asked my dad a lot more. We talked a lot, but it was mostly small talk. And but there's so many things I wish I could have asked him. Like, what was my grandfather's middle name? It was E. I mean, E was his initial. And my grandfather died like 2 years before I was born, so I never knew him, obviously. So fortunately, my cousin Gary, his dad was Donald Adler, my dad's brother. He died, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe? Less than that, maybe around 10 years ago. We did have a chance to ask him what E stood for. It stands for E. That's as simple as that. There was several John Adlers in the area, and they had to differentiate. So when he became of age and had to, take out loans and things like this, they needed to distinguish him from the other rascals. And so that's
Started in 1920. He was forced to close a saloon. At that time, he purchased the Plath Bakery at 160.
Closing the saloon, that deserves comment too. Our mother used to tell us the story about how when Prohibition came around, of course these saloons didn't just have, it wasn't like in Gunsmoke where you said whiskey and they set down a bottle. A lot of it was in kegs. Whiskey was in kegs. So you had a date, I think it was January 17th or something like this of 1920. And when Prohibition went into effect, you had to get rid of everything you had to get something for it, otherwise they're going to just come and destroy it, revenuers. And so our mother, I remember telling us these stories about how people came with pans. I mean, they didn't have plastic milk jugs, and they tapped, you sold off the extra, the leftover. You remember this story? You don't remember that one? Maybe I made it. Wash pans, kettles, that kind of stuff,
Medicinal.
just to, get the alcohol. This picture here, it's
South Central Avenue. Immediate.
I was in Thimbleberry Books a couple of years ago, and there was a postcard on the wall in there, because that's Thimbleberry Books right now. And I had never seen it before, so I got out my sophisticated camera and closed it up to it and so forth, and I got a fairly good image of it. So that was Hotel Charles also had in their later years the El Sombrero.
Oh, yeah.
In case you
The north
remember that.
of the Hotel
Kind of a cool
Charles.
place. I never got
Guests
in.
at the hotel were famously treated to the wonderful aroma of baking bread. Initially, sales were primarily over the counter at the Vienna Bakery
Kellogg's
and
Frosted
to little
Flakes.
stores served by the railroad. Large wooden crates were used to ship the loaves of bread.
You'll notice that their linen contractor didn't really do a good job on their aprons. You'll see that throughout this. Anyway, this is a bread slicing machine. You've always heard the expression cooler than sliced bread. Well, there was a time when bread just wasn't sliced, So this was the machine. And my Uncle Shorty was in charge of this operation and all. And I believe he cut his finger off once. And they sewed it back on the tip of his finger, but yeah. Anyway, I think they probably shut the line down for a little bit.
Truck routes were added in the mid-1920s. Local grocery stores were also stocked with bread and other bakery products. John Adler married Lena Upman on February 15th, 1904 at St. John's Catholic Church in Marshfield. They had 6 children: Mabel Adler Rosinski, Barbara Adler Paulin, Raymond Adler, Sylvester Adler, Margaret Adler Martin, and Donald Adler.
Now, Mabel Adler, she was the oldest, and she, I guess she worked at the bakery in her younger years, but her husband was a car salesman for S&S Chevrolet for his career. Yeah, so we had a lot of Chevrolets. And Barbara Paulin, her husband Terrence, managed the pastry shop. He was an expert cake decorator. He made wedding cakes for lots of us. And my dad was Ray. Sylvester is my cousin. Well, he's got a lot of kids, but one notable one to me is John, and because John's wife Mary works in the library here. So, Margaret Adler Martin her husband was Pepper Martin, who had North Parkway. And then Donald Adler is my godfather, it turns out, and he was the youngest of them all.
The sons were involved in the business part-time before their graduation from high school. Raymond became full-time in 1927, sometimes as a route salesman. His father semi-retired in 1930 because of health problems, and Ray assumed the management of the bakery at that time. Sylvester, known by many as Shorty, followed as a full-time employee in 1929.
My Uncle Shorty, his real name was Sylvester, as you just saw, and my Uncle Donald, and a custom in our family was we got our middle names from our uncles. You know. So you were Patrick John after uncle on the mother's side, and James Donald, and my brother Dick was Richard Sylvester. And my daughter Amy, at one point, thought that we were named after cartoon characters.
Paula, her husband of their sister Barbara, was hired in 1926. And Donald Adler joined his brothers full-time after discharge from the Army in 1945. In 1932, the name of the business was changed from the Vienna Bakery to the Adler Baking Company. At that same time, a second building was purchased at 343 South Central Avenue.
Now, there's another picture that comes up shortly after this one. I'm not sure if it's earlier or later, but it's of a fire down that block. And you notice that Weber, this would be Hub Weber's supermarket in the corner there. That was the book and stationery for many years. And now it's an antique store again. Yes. And then the bakery was here. And then you're going to see another picture that says Randy Currow's grocery store is somewhere in here too. You know. And of course we got the Lumley store down here,
And was called the Adler Pastry Shop. Clarence Paulin became the manager of the pastry shop.
See, there's Randy Carroll's food market there. Hey, hard time putting that perspective together. Now, in 1948, my dad bought a movie camera. And he
Bread was baked and donuts were fried at the main location. The pastry shop prepared the sweet rolls, pies, cakes.
He went nuts with that movie camera. And he'd like shoot 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there, fireworks with 30 seconds, you know, and it would all be on one 8mm tape, you know. So my mom eventually had all that converted to VHS tape. Now, that's about as good as papyrus too. So then eventually I had it digitalized. It was VHS tape, so it's third generation, you know. Then I went through and I chopped it up so that I chopped up all these little sequences of 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there, and I started putting tags on that so I could make some sense out of them, sort them out and all that. And so that's what you see in some of these kind of blurry videos, but to us they're kind of priceless. So that's my grandfather there, and he's the character that would take these white sugar cookies here, and he would stand out in front of the bakery and hand those out to kids going by on bicycles and stuff. Now, this groundhog tea. No, all this stuff in here, that's all just really great. You know, we grew up kind of, Pat and I grew up kind of funny because we're lucky we aren't heavier than we are. We thought all kids grew up this way. When I would come home from school, and we would come home from school, there would always be a white bag with stuff in it, you know, like French donuts, chocolate eclairs, every holiday. I mean, and holidays were just about everything, like George Washington's birthday was a holiday. You'd have hatchet cookies. Valentine's Day, of course, you'd have heart cookies. Easter, oh, you had these cupcakes that had little nests with a jelly bean on them, you know, and on and on and on. There was just something for everything. And so we, you know, we just got home, we ate that stuff, we figured everybody got that. I didn't get that, did you? Yeah, and I don't know, these things are, to me, they're very memorable, like this old clock in the background there, and he had an old Underwood typewriter in there. That was my dad's office. At the time, the old ceiling up there, now Thimbleberry Books has got that ceiling back, you know, and those old fans, they were great. In the back room where the baking was done, one of my jobs when I worked there, I was like in 7th and 8th grade, was sometimes to change these fly strips, those things that
Coffee cakes and cookies. Legend has it that John Adler often handed out fresh sugar cookies to youngsters who happened to be passing by the front of the Vienna bakery. John Adler died on March 30th, 1943. This photo of Donald, Lena, and John was captured just months earlier.
I'm not sure what he
His
died of.
son
but
Donald was serving in the Army
Might
at
have been
Camp
prostate
Wallace,
cancer.
Texas, at the time of his death,
Probably
and
consumption.
was called home for the funeral.
Everybody died of
Donald
consumption.
was later stationed in the South Pacific. A partnership was then formed between Lena Adler and her 3 sons after John died. Ray was responsible for the general management of the company, including retail sales, ordering of supplies, and personnel oversight. Shorty Adler was in charge of operations, the baking, slicing, and wrapping. Before entering the Army, Donnie Adler had graduated from Wausau Business College. After his discharge in 1945, he assumed the bookkeeping duties. Raymond Adler married Valerie Harry in 1939. They had 4 sons, Robert, Patrick, James, and Richard.
And this is
Sylvester Adler married Lucille
is
Spiller
John
in
Adler.
1941. They had 7 children, Paul, Russell, Mary, Barbara, Janice, John, and David. Donald Adler married Louise Norecki in 1948. They had 3 sons, Gordon, Gary, and Greg. Barbara Adler married Clarence Paulin in 1926. They had a son, Laverne, and a daughter, Beverly. Ray Adler is on the left of this snapshot. Wilmer and Dorothy Paulin both worked at Adler Baking. Wilmer for much of his adult life. He was a brother of Clarence Paulin.
This, their son Jack here went on to become a Hall of Fame basketball and baseball coach in Wisconsin, down around Lancaster was his base. So he's been recognized. People down there are well.
We're also
with
dear
Jack
friends
Paul.
of the entire Adler family. They are shown here with their son Jack.
So we had at least 60 employees at the peak. That's pretty good size. The truck routes went all over Junction City, Stevens Point, I think. This is again some of my dad's footage. And Lemley's in the background. obviously I haven't recognized many of the employees in the past. I only have a dozen and a half names shown there. It's really hard to reconstruct. I couldn't find the computerized payroll records.
How many names did you find?
Probably about 18 or so. Yeah. Those are just mainly my recollections and my brother's recollections. And, probably could have scratched a little harder.
A lot of them are parents of kids we were in school with.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Chester Roller was a good guy. He ran kind of a panel truck, delivery truck, and Pat used to work with him.
He was an in-town deliverer.
Yeah, yeah. Harry Wagner was a truck driver, Ray Grawl.
I think, Jim, that's Meg. Remember Meg was a
Right,
technician?
exactly,
That's
yep.
her dad.
That's right, that's right. That's Harry Wagner. Always got a pencil in his ear. Now this is,
Yeah, there you go.
this is kind of interesting here. The price of bread has changed a little bit over the years, I guess, huh? So you know, go to Panera Bread and see if you can get a loaf for 15 cents. But it's pretty good bread.
This kind of music is like heaven to me.
That's Chester Roller.
It's got me higher than a car.
I think Lenore was married to his sons. Ray Grossfire, Pat? That's Roy Harper. He didn't work there, but he hung around a bit. Okay, this here's the last. You just saw a little white truck there. It was called a step van. I don't want to back this up. I'm afraid I may have to start over at the beginning. That's my favorite truck. That's a truck I worked on when I was like 13, 7th or 8th grade. I worked on a bread truck, and so I was like the driver's helper, you know. And it never crossed my mind that to me I was the driver's helper. To the driver, I was the boss's kid. The boss's spy. Whatever, you know. Anyway, we were down at the Thomas grocery store, south side, across from Sacred Heart Church. You know, kind of down in there one day, and Norby Hendricks, the driver, was in the back room talking to a bunch of other drivers. They BS'd a little bit, and writing up his slip for the bread we delivered, I delivered, and that sort of thing. And the truck was parked in the front of the store, kind of facing the front window. And another driver from a different company comes in and says, "Norby, can you move your truck a little bit so I can get my own?" He said, "Jim, go out there and move it." I didn't know what a clutch was. So anyway, I jump up into the driver's seat, so turn on the key, you know, the truck goes, boom, boom, boom. More like this. And I got out, stepped out, you good? Had a little bit to go, I went back in, turned it on again. That looked perfect, go back in, Margaret said, get it, Jim? I said, piece of cake. That's why I didn't want to join the Teamsters. True story. So competition got kind of tough at some point. But I know my dad always said that
Luna Adler died on February 3rd.
it wasn't the Jaeger Bakery or Bunny Bread or any of those other Gardeners or any of those competitors that were the biggest competitors. The biggest competitors were farmers baking their own bread. Yeah, that was probably the biggest source of bread, was people making their own. We're talking about 60 or 70 years ago.
1966. The buildings at 166 South Central Avenue and at 343 South Central Avenue were part of Mrs. Adler's estate. This fact added financial stress to the business. After 45 years, the Adler Baking Company discontinued operations on Saturday, April 30th, 1966.
So the bakery basically had to break up because of the money. The properties were owned by my grandmother, and in order to pay the estates, which was six children she had, you had to liquidate it. So what are you going to do? My dad and my uncles were not in a position to buy out everybody else or anything like that, and so that's what happened. And then there were other factors, like around that same time, grocery stores were starting to have their own bakeries. So you might say North Parkway was competing with Adler Bakery, and I keep it in the family now. You know. That was a big factor, and those are the kind of things that.
At that time, there were 20
The service bakery trucks were on the road at that time.
That's right.
I drove one.
Did you? They had a depot out on Rodis Avenue. Right?
Yeah, right.
That's right, across from where the swimming pool is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I recall, because I remember it was okay if we firebombed them or something. Well, yeah, then another factor that hurt the retail downtown business was, at that time, we had diagonal parking through town, not parallel parking. So when they did away with diagonal parking and effectively make Central Avenue wider, 2 lanes each way, that stopped a lot of people who would from coming into the bakery and stocking up on chocolate eclairs and things like that every time they went through town. And it's the same thing a lot of businesses face now when bypasses.
or part-time employees.
Kind of tells it all there.
The former Vienna Bakery building was sold and became the new home of Gerald's Clothing. Today, it is the location of Thimbleberry's Books.
Notice the great film editing there?
The Adler Pastry Shop became the John H. Keel Photography Studio for many years. Another photography business is now in that location.
That basically is it. Any questions?
Did you guys service your own trucks? Or just
Service them? You mean like?
oil changes?
Oh, no, I'm sure they went somewhere. Like a shop somewhere, a truck store.
Were they all Chevrolet?
Jeez, I couldn't tell you. Bullshit. I wouldn't be surprised, yeah.
Yeah, probably Chevrolet garage, yeah.
I think sometimes they gotta pick new trucks up at some truck body place, you know, that Cadillac or whatever.
A lot of them had the boxes put on apples.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Pat, do you have what can you embellish this with? What are your memories?
Oh, there's a lot of things that, it's not to repeat a lot of stuff. One time I was in a small truck delivering pies to one of the restaurants, and the driver told me to get those pies out back. Well, instead of going outside and going around getting the doors open in the back, I had to go through where the pies were sitting, and I stepped on a blueberry pie.
Oh.
That wasn't good. I was put to rest at that time. No more stepping in the truck. That's one of my most vivid. And the other, we always worked at night in the summertime, so we couldn't get out and have a good time. Yeah, 50 cents an hour.
Yes, I got 75.
Did all of the kids take a swing at working at the bakery? Of all this?
Did Bob work there?
I don't remember Bob working there. He was golfing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I did, you did. I don't think Dick did. No, well, no, Dick was an old one. So, yeah, and then most of our cousins didn't have a chance either. There's one fellow that was in the dark kind of around there named Billy Brzezinski. He was the first cousin of ours. He worked there. And, yeah. But, like, Gary Adler and that family, they didn't have a chance to work there because by the time they were old enough, it was out of business.
One thing we didn't want to do is, none of us wanted to take over the bakery. The unions were really too tough.
Yeah.
And it was time to close up.
Well, there
So
was such a thin margin, you know. One of my other memories working on the bread truck is we would make deliveries to these little mom and pop grocery stores, like Wolf's Grocery. You know, there were a lot of grocery stores. And we would haul in a pan like that of glazed donuts. What were like 3 dozen glazed donuts on there, and covered with a piece of wax paper top and bottom. The donuts were sold to the grocery store for 4 cents, and they would sell them for a nickel. They were talking really good donuts. Yeah, I mean, that's how it was. Been a little inflation since then.
Jim, did they supply bakery to the hospital?
No,
No, they made their
I
own.
don't believe so. We did supply it to the taverns.
Oh.
I remember delivering rye bread to Shirky's, which is, well, that became Crafts, and then eventually became West 14th Street, that place, you know? And now, what is it, Southway, I think, or something?
and they're closed on Mondays because we were going to go to eat there after this.
Was that right? Oh, well, there's places that are open. But anyway, that was always fun delivering, because that's when you had a chance to have a glass of beer. I mean, the drivers, every time they made a delivery to a tavern, well, they had little glasses, you know, little glasses. We're talking 5 to 7 ounces, so it wasn't a big deal. You got into that, right? Because you worked for a service bakery driver. So you couldn't just go in and drop off 6 loaves of rye bread and not have a tap, you know?
Well, I really didn't do it, but, but I'm sure there's others that did.
Yeah.
Jim, did they have any like proprietary recipes that they transferred to a different bakery or anything? That's now
Yeah,
making
actually, yeah, you know, the buildings didn't become bakeries, but Jerry's Bakery bought the ovens, and I think he probably picked up a lot of that recipe stuff. I know Carol's Supermarket got stuffing mix, like, you know, during the winter holidays, the bakery would sell this dried stuffing mix for making turkey stuffing, you know, they got, like this brownberry stuff you buy now, except it didn't come in cellophane bags back then. And those recipes, I think, were sold like to Carol's, I think. And then Jerry's Bakery bought ovens and some of that equipment. And one of the, you know, our dad was involved in the procurement of supplies. And when they, like if you bought donuts, you'd get them in these nice white boxes. I don't know, white boxes. They ran out of those, but it took 15 years before they ran out of this red tape that they sealed the boxes with. They must have gotten one hell of a deal. Remember that?
Have you ever tried to duplicate the recipes at all?
No.
No. No baking?
Double flavor? What would you put twice as much of in there for?
Butter maybe, I don't know.
What did your dad do after that?
Oh, yeah, those were tough times, you know. That was all my dad really knew. He worked for the post office for a little while. And I remember him telling me that he had a Coca-Cola on break, and that was the first time he ever had a Coca-Cola. And this was in the 60s. Kind of funny how things stick with you. He worked at the hospital for a number of years as a television, for the auxiliary, delivering televisions, you know. And they didn't have them on the walls back then. They didn't think of that kind of a thing. They would choose them around.
Wouldn't have, an extra couple dollars on your bill if you had.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Something like that. Maybe they paid cash for it.
Washington E. Boucher.
Washington Boucher, right? Washington Boucher. Right, Boucher's radio, and
Oh, yeah.
he finished up his life doing that too. I think my dad took over for him, or was, I'm not sure who was first. Maybe he came later. And Donnie Adler worked as a night clerk for a number of years at the, it was hardest on him when the bakery went out of business because he was the youngest. And I know that was a very tough time. He worked as a night clerk out at the Knights Inn, which became the Holiday Inn, and now it's the Marshfield Convention Center out there. And Shorty, what did Shorty do?
Worked at the KC Hall.
He worked at the KC Hall, but I don't know if that was really gainful employment. I'm not sure. You know, but he was pretty important out there. He worked in the kitchen a lot out at KC Hall. I don't think it was. So yeah, those were tough times because they weren't really young enough to really retire.
What unions were involved?
I think Teamsters for truck drivers. I'm not sure if there's bakers.
Bakers also had a
Was there?
union, yeah, they were tough. They were making a lot of money for that time.
Yeah, you know, one thing I never ever heard my dad do was swear. Right? Never heard him swear.
Never thought of
And but he did have a word that, you know, if somebody was giving him trouble, he was a stinker.
it.
A stinker. That's pretty strong language, I guess, you know. Yeah, there was a lot of tension. Anything else?
I guess in close proximity to Hotel Charles, Adler had an opportunity to serve them, because that was the place to go for new lunch, banquets and things like that, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure the product was used there, you know, in the restaurant there and all. They had a pretty good restaurant there. That's where we had our wedding reception many years ago. 50 years ago. Yeah. And then there was that coffee shop that was in the Hotel Charles there too. What was that called? Buckers? Buckers.
That was
good. Okay, we can go on forever. Okay, well, I thank you all for coming.